sanctuary today. Apparently, we had so many people last week that we violated fire codes in the chapel, so we decided to move it here today. And we'll be here this week and next week. Originally, Jeff Jacobs from Camp Henry was going to speak, but he is sick, so we got Rachel Hood to fill in, who's amazing. She's a super lady if you've never met her before. She is a longtime Westminsterite. She's also a state representative. And sorry, I have her. And she's currently on the chair of Appropriations Subcommittee on Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, and also serves on the Department of Health and Human Services, Transportation, and General Government Committee. So she's a wonderful person to speak both about being a Christian, about creation care, and she has a long history of working for a clean environment. So she's a perfect person, and we thank her so much for filling in last minute. And I just want to remind you that the Adult Faith Formation Hour, we try to start about 15 minutes after the service ends, and it lasts around an hour. We know some people have to come a little late and leave a little early, and that's okay. And we thank you all for being here. Sorry, I'm trying to light a candle and talk in here at the same time. So we always light the Christ candle. Oh no. Here, can you hold this one? Yes. Okay. So we always light the Christ candle at the beginning of our time together. This is to remind us that as we gather to worship and learn, we are remembering that Jesus is the light of the world. It is in his light that we see light, and it is his light that we are light. Will you please pray with me? Dear God, thank you for bringing us all together today in this space on this sacred ground. We thank you for Rachel and her gifts and her ability to be here with us this morning. And we pray that you will be with us all as we learn together and enjoy fellowship together. Pray this in Jesus' name, amen.
I think it's on, yep. There we go. Good morning. It's really an honor to be with you. I think I have about 15 minutes to start, and bear with me while I just set up a timer so I don't start talking for a half hour, and we don't have any time for questions or discussion. No, thank you though. That's why I like Westminster. Everybody's always so generous. I am Rachel Hood. I serve in the northeast side of the city in the newly drawn 81st House District. That includes Grand Rapids Township, Ada Township, and the southern edges of Plainfield Township as well. I've been serving in my entire career in Grand Rapids. I grew up in southeast Michigan in Royal Oak. And it's ironic, I'm going to give you a document from Royal Oak today, just a full circle happenstance. And then I went to Michigan State where I studied social policy at James Madison College there, and then began my career in West Michigan. I came here because I wanted to be closer to the lakes, because the lakes here you could actually swim in the beaches. They weren't closed all the time, as they often are in southeast Michigan, where I grew up. I came here because I saw a unique opportunity of a Midwest Rust Belt city that was really, in 1999, 2000, at the precipice of making some investments that would begin to create the environment we're in now, where we are a city that is attracting young people back to the state of Michigan, reversing the statewide overall multi-decade trend. I chose West Michigan very intentionally. My husband is here, Dave's in the back of the room, and he's a kid of the San Francisco Bay. And of course, it was really tempting at times when we were younger to think about moving out west and being able to live in such a beautiful space as the Bay Area. And to be closer to Dave's family, his sisters and brothers. But ultimately, we have decided very intentionally to stay in the Midwest and to stay specifically in the midst of the Great Lakes, the greatest source of accessible, potable, fresh water on the planet. And we've chosen that because we understand how important this place is in the midst of a rapidly changing world and in the midst of climate change. And because we watch climate change somewhat remotely as it happened to Dave's family on the West Coast. And now, as climate change has accelerated, we've started to feel it be much more present here in our own lives. We also did this because we realized that here we had some opportunities to really drive policy and drive change, whereas we felt like in the big, huge fishbowl of the San Francisco Bay Area, we wouldn't be able to have quite as much impact. And so I just want to thank Dave for making sure we could do this work and becoming committed to it himself. We are raising a couple of young people, and of course, young people are really driving the climate response these days, which is a wonderful and hopeful thing. On the 26th of this week, young people will be hosting one of the largest ever climate rallies to ever be on the steps of the state capitol. And I would encourage you, if you have flexibility in your schedule, maybe grab a few friends and drive over on the 26th. We need your voices in Lansing. I'll talk a little bit more about what I need you to say. But here we are sailing. You can see Iniga in the back, a particularly thoughtful kid who is very aware of what her future looks like, who grew up with environmental literacy from a very small age, and who reflects to us on a regular basis how she's concerned about how the world is changing. Our state has really had some significant political movement over the last several years. And we have been, until just recently, about 2019, our state's leaders were hesitating to acknowledge the existence of climate change and also disinvesting in the very important things that we need to be resilient in the face of climate change, which is infrastructure. It is quality housing. It is HVAC systems in our schools, right? Very practical things that during many years of austerity budgets, Michiganders just couldn't have, that were withheld. So we're now in a period of climate progress where we have new leadership that is acknowledging climate change's existence and saying, hold on a minute, we're way behind. And we're really looking for ways to advance and accelerate solutions here. But some things in Michigan haven't quite changed yet. One of them, well, we've done redistricting and citizen redistricting, which was really greatly important. We haven't done a significant amount of work on government transparency and on campaign finance reform. And so the things that are not changing in Michigan right now, at the precipice of this enormous moment where literally the planet is tipping into a future we don't want for our children, and that is the influence of utility companies who are built on powering the state and generating electricity through fossil fuels, the influence of businesses and institutions who are hesitant to change and scared of a future. And so we cannot take for granted that our amazing trifecta, SNAP, is going to be able to push against those really entrenched forces in our political and policy systems. We really have to work together to create accountability for an aggressive and high quality climate response in Michigan. The My Healthy Climate Plan was established to help deliver the governor's vision on our climate future. But and it does a great job. It focuses, if I can deliver some constructive criticism, it doesn't focus enough on our water systems. And it has already been identified by the NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, which is a really critical organization. They deliver great science-based response to climate. That, acknowledging that what is written in the plan really doesn't direct our achievement to goal by 2030, 2035, that we need to go further and deeper than this particular plan. So we have new leadership at Eagle, and I'm hopeful that in the near term we'll continue to deepen this work and advance change. So we talked about some of the things that are changing. I think people are changing in their awareness because literally for some of the first moments in our lives, we are feeling climate change in very dramatic ways. The Midwest was under a cloud of smoke for several days this summer. How many of you, was that the first time you experienced forest fire smoke like that? Yeah. And for that duration, right. So that was a big wake-up call, wasn't it? What were some of the things you were hearing from your community during this time? Right. Those were really warm days too. So were some of you worried about family members or friends or community members that didn't have air conditioning? That was a new concern for us. How many of you have asthma, children with asthma, spouses, partners? Few. My hand's raised because we do. Really concerned about those folks on these hot and smoky days, right? And maybe they acknowledged that their lungs felt tighter and that they were coughing a little bit and responding. I added a photo here of Detroit, Southwest Detroit, one of the most toxic sites in the nation. Air pollution is a problem for those folks every day. High rates of asthma, respiratory disease, cardiac disease, and astronomical rates of cancer in the communities in proximity to this heavily industrialized site. Marathon Oil is here, automotive parts manufacturing is here, a whole lot of really intense uses. On the bottom is Detroit on these terrible days of smoke that we experienced over the summer. You can see the Rensen vaguely in the bottom. Add these together. Understand that this is additive, right? And it becomes a toxic soup. People ingesting compounds that we don't even understand how they interact together. Really, just critical. West Michigan, just so you know, our air quality is regularly a D. We receive a lot of the industrial air pollution from Metro Chicago and Milwaukee. And on hot days, the lakes act as an oven with the atmosphere. I've heard meteorologists describe it as double baking that toxic soup. So we are not immune, even though we don't have as much visual impact as you might see here in Detroit. It isn't something we can set aside as a consideration. We also had a pretty dramatic storm, something, my 47 years in Michigan, I'd never seen a storm as intense as the storm we had. Now, we can't call weather climate, but we can call it climate-like weather. These are demonstrations of a system, or several systems that are breaking down, right, and creating these significantly large storms. This storm was multiple tornadoes. The tornado broke off and created damage here immediately in West Michigan on both sides of the river, northeast Grand Rapids and Plainfield Township, and then Walker and Rockford. It went on down the 96 corridor into Metro Detroit. That night I was in Ann Arbor with my energy friends and experiencing the storm probably 45 minutes after it had happened, and my family experienced it. And man, it was startling. It was so fast and intense, and within like 5 minutes, so much damage was done. These are the things that we'll continue to see. Flooding, of course. A lot of us experienced the 2013 flood. This is Metro Detroit, which on a regular basis is completely disrupted by floods at this scale that shut down our interstate corridors in 14 feet of stormwater. Our aging housing, or aged housing, victimizes people in many ways. And then, just so you are aware, Michigan's building codes have always been some of the poorest in the country. So we are dealing with the repercussions of that now with buildings that are leaking, they're unhealthy. They're bringing vermin and moisture into homes, which creates mold, and all of those respiratory triggers that happen after that. These homes also victimize families in terms of the cost of energy, leading to the disruption in housing, transiency, unpaid bills, and people living, without basic utilities. flooding causes a lot of damage. I think one of the key reasons I'm an environmentalist is because I grew up in Royal Oak, a swamp. I literally, like the swamp that I got tadpoles from in the spring as a kid, as a little kid, what became my junior high. So I watched that, that wetland, like many of the wetlands in southeast Michigan and really southwest Michigan too, become developed. And every summer, my home had several events where we had 4 inches of sewer water in the basement until my parents refinanced and got a sub pump. This is still a problem in Metro Detroit, and during major storm events, we used to receive, a big storm was maybe 2 or 3 inches. Now big storms are 5, 6, 7 inches. We have aging infrastructure that isn't built to handle that much water, and so water goes where it finds a way. And that includes into homes, and that causes hundreds of dollars of damage and disruption for families in our communities on a pretty regular basis in Michigan. So we have a unique moment to accelerate change, and we can do that. Here is some work to capture stormwater. Grand Rapids is way ahead of the state in having financed the completion of our CSO combined sewer overflow and stormwater infrastructure, helping to better manage our water, keep it clean, and reduce our energy demand. And literally last week, I was, in doing that work, Grand Rapids also really evolved leading the state and integrating stormwater management in our streets designs and in how we build our buildings. I was part of that work before I ran for office at the West Michigan Environmental Action Council. This week I met with the Great Lakes Water Authority, Southeast Michigan's largest water utility. And they were not aware of all the work that Grand Rapids had done to manage our stormwater and separate our CSO. And they were surprised to meet with a chairwoman of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy who didn't have to understand, go through like Water Systems 101 before they could have a conversation. The lack of conversation on these issues in Michigan has been profound, which isn't to say that people haven't been trying to have these conversations for 20 or 30 years. We have. We've been desperate for it. And finally now we have an environment in which we can hear the leaders like the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, who has a first-class stormwater program in place. And it's been there for a decade, but it hasn't been utilized by any of the local communities in the area, right? Now we have a chance to bring our eyes and our hearts and our backbones to focus on these opportunities, and they're right in front of us. Clean energy, we are literally in the next 2 weeks beginning to move clean energy, 3 climate bills, and then hopefully several other bill packages to work alongside that to advance clean energy in Michigan. This is an issue that has long dragged for us because of climate denial, because of lack of agreement between major stakeholders like labor unions and the environmental community and local government. These are, and industry, these are long-held conflicts, and we are very hopeful to roll up our sleeves and get good work done in the coming days. But there are forces at play who are trying to disrupt that again. fiddling with definitions and policy. We really need to encourage our local leaders in West Michigan communities, those people who we have elected to be accountable to advancing quality climate work and to holding bad actors in our climate journey accountable. Our utilities, one of them in particular, is performing at the worst in the nation, and yet is trying to set our climate goals. 7 people died in Detroit because they didn't have access to energy for 10 days. And that same company is trying to drive our climate policy. So your voices, as citizens, as Christians who care about our communities, as average everyday people who go out and vote, I hope you're voting, we need your voices now. And that is not hyperbole. It is the moment, it is nigh. So I couldn't say no to presenting this morning when Jen called at 10 o'clock. It wasn't an option. Some good news. The federal government and now our state government are leading forward on once in a century investments in infrastructure. And they're leading with climate justice principles like Justice 40, which requires that we are setting aside resources to have a direct impact on those communities that are most harmed by climate change and least prepared to make the infrastructure investments that we need for resiliency. So we have a $50 billion influx of funding across the nation. And on the water side alone, a $280 million investment in Michigan's water infrastructure. It's just a down payment on a $19 billion need. I'm past my time, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the details here. But I was pleased to lead these significant investments in the Eagle budget. We have climate legislation, first hearing in the Senate last week. We expect the House will begin to move on these bills in late September, early October. These bills will establish a renewable portfolio standard to get us to 100% carbon-free energy by 2035. Allowing the regulatory body that manages energy distribution, the Michigan Public Service Commission, to consider climate factors, affordability, and equity in decision-making for the first time. Right now, it's just pure dollars and cents. We will have a bill that updates and expands the energy waste reduction standards for utilities and creates additional accountability. And there are 2 bills, bipartisan package of bills, calling on the Michigan Public Service Commission to establish a clear pathway for community solar. Community solar allowing more people to purchase clean energy closer to home without having to make those big investments, you know, the $25,000 investment for rooftop solar. We're anticipating a stormwater fee bill that will clarify some issues and allow cities to begin to generate resources to manage stormwater and to advance infrastructure solutions across the state, paired with a climate core bill that will develop a program for have about $7 million ready to invest in youth jobs and climate core jobs program similar to AmeriCorps, focused on climate solutions, and some of the high touch needs that we have as it relates to maintaining our climate resiliency impacts and investments. I mentioned that I have a document here from Royal Oak, my hometown. This is a resolution in support of House and Senate environmental bills that are currently active in the legislature. It was the tidiest way I could find to, without creating a new document, print out all the bills that are at play and send them home with people who want to work on that and contact their legislators. So I didn't make enough for everybody, but if you'd like one, those are a paper version. We can probably print out a few more if they're needed, and they'll be sent to you along with the presentation afterwards as well. Thank you, and do we have time for discussion and questions? Great.
Yeah, we'll probably have, even up to 11:49. Yeah, up to half an hour.
Great. Mike?
Yeah, can you go back one slide, please? The two House bills, 4382, 4383.
Yeah.
Are those going to allow the state to be able to recover some of the ability to protect wetlands where that protection is lost in the way the Supreme Court ruled?
Yeah. So Mike is asking about if these bills will be able to help us reclaim some of our ability to protect our waters lost in the recent Supreme Court hearing on waters of the U.S. And I would say that, yes, it will. This is an important bill because watersheds don't really align with political boundaries. And this will allow multiple governments to work together to advance watershed scale solutions, which is important because, we know water moves through a watershed down to the lowest areas in our communities, which tend to be our older areas, which tend to be our lower income areas or our redlined areas, like all of these intersections of land use policy in our state, right? And in order to protect those people, we have to capture water way up in the watershed. So this will allow for communities to get more active in that work, make larger land investments, which may include opportunities to protect wetlands, or to expand wetlands, or to create wetlands for water protection. There are all sorts of intricacies in water of the U.S., which has much broader impacts, but we don't have 3 hours, so.
Could you explain that Supreme Court recent decision? That's a real negative, right?
Yeah, and essentially this has been a property rights question that has been controversial for quite some time about whether or not governments can apply regulations to require certain property owners to refrain from developing property or to develop it in such a way that it honors the existing water systems. It applies to the technical piece is that there are navigable and non-navigable waters. Navigable water is anything you can float a canoe on, right? And those can all be regulated by governments. Non-navigable waters, like a wetland that is full of reeds, or maybe seasonal, sometimes it's dry, other times it's wet. Those are the sponges of our great water system. They're the liver of our water system, and because they're not navigable, they can't be regulated. So the Supreme Court upheld that. Does that make sense? Good one, Diane. In the back of the room, Marcy. Yeah, thank you. I serve on the executive committee of an organization called the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus. And I'm glad you asked this question because it brings up an interesting thing I've recently become fired up about. That is an international body in the US and Canada of state legislators, state and provincial legislators who come together to work on Great Lakes Protection Act and subsequent work towards that. So in 2008, a series of legislative, both federally and at the state and local level, moved forward the Great Lakes Protection Act, which is a binding agreement that set the edges of the watershed. We hear talked about in terms of takings when Chicago is, pulling water out to nearby suburbs out of the Great Lakes watershed, right? Or we see that in Wisconsin too. So we continue to work together to move policies in our states, and then collaboratively to work federal policy, and to make sure that we continue the federal funding that has been delivered the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So there is a collaborative space. Last weekend, I was in Quebec, maybe it was the weekend before that, I don't know. It's been busy. With the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus. And we heard from one of the Mohawk tribes who are the indigenous to the St. Lawrence River and to the land where the St. Lawrence Seaway was placed. We heard about the impacts of the seaway in their lives. And we heard a request from them to join our table, advancing a larger understanding legislatively of what a nation means. And just a thrilling moment in history to be a part of, and an act that I hope to champion to begin to bring the indigenous nations to the table in a formal way. I believe firmly that tribal law will save us. And so those tribal leaders need to be at the table and arguably need to be leading these discussions moving forward. And that was a big gap in our white man world, right? that I have an opportunity to see and uncover. And that brings up another point that here in Grand Rapids, our own local tribe, the Grand River Band of Odawa Indians, have not received federal recognition over a 27-year period. I've been very proud to be part of resolutions in the House and in several ceremonial events where we begin to highlight this mission and history. And I'm very excited that our newly elected representative from the 3rd Congressional District, Representative Hillary Skolton, will be delivering a bipartisan bill in the coming weeks, calling on recognition for that tribe. I will also say that just spiritually, having worked on this river corridor for the last 20 years and its watersheds, I don't think we will be able to move forward with changes in the river until we correct that issue. And again, I'm saying that from like a spiritual perspective. It's the transition of time across history, right? When you look at it in big arches, I think it speaks to that moment, the struggles we've been having to get that work done. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The question was, are there groups and organizations that oppose the work that I'm doing? And the answer is yes. And I said very politely in my presentation that we cannot assume that just because Democrats have gotten the trifecta in Michigan, that the entirety of the broad Democratic ideology base is prepared to be as aggressive as we need to be in public policy to address the climate issue and to deliver quality climate work. And so what I'm saying, what's kind of between the lines there, is that, yeah, there are significant forces opposing us. And if you are paying attention to the paper and looking at the leadership, you can, and if you're looking at public campaign finance documents, you can find troubling intersections between those who oppose climate legislation and the Democratic leadership that we have right now.
So here at Westminster, Michigan, what are the best sources that you're aware of for us to be following, to be getting information?
Yeah.
Including in the public media or the good internet media.
Yeah. So there is Midwest Energy News is a really great news organization that covers energy journalism in depth and energy topics and energy policy. I always refer people to Bridge, Michigan, and Advance, the Michigan Advance, is that right? Who are nonprofit journalism entities. Michigan Radio is a really wonderful, trusted source, although I feel like they should be doing all environmental policy journalism. And they have a whole breadth of things that they need to cover. Those are all really great resources. I encourage you to closely follow Michigan League of Conservation Voters and Sierra Club. And I'll also note that, like the Democratic Party, the environmental movement has some division as well. And so you'll see some differences between what a group like MLCV is recommending and a group like Sierra Club is recommending. But none of those groups are sort of like organizations that I would consider too far left or uninformed, right? They're all part of, relatively moderate political spectrum of dialogue. You've had a question.
So electric energy consumers, years ago, there was an opportunity to pay more money to for green energy. And I opted for that, so I'm wondering, was that a good idea? is that a good investment for me to make? And this is kind of a side comment. Yesterday, I was with some family. A person in my family is an employee of Consumers Energy at the power plant run by coal south of Grand Haven, and which is supposed to close, and his great fears of how he will be.
Yeah, all really tough questions. The first two, clean energy is actually cheaper and significantly cheaper than fossil fuel energy, and it has been for about a decade, maybe a little shy of a decade. So the notion of paying more for clean energy is one that all of us should fundamentally question. And that, though, is a person who has often paid a premium for clean energy. So the economics of our public utilities having become quasi-public and privately financed in 2008 has led to a situation where people are now driven by making money off of utility ratepayers rather than delivering services as their first priority. And there are projects here locally in Grand Rapids and across the country, across the state, for clean energy that have been stalled for over a decade because even though it would be financeable under normal circumstances, the energy utility companies are not allowing certain projects to use the grid resources that we finance as ratepayers to deliver clean energy back onto the grid without them making a profit on it. And so that position that the energy utilities will not support any policy moving forward unless it makes them the sole producer of power in Michigan, that's their position right now, also means that we lose out as ratepayers on the financial benefits of clean energy. Yeah, I believe that there is a little spark of a fire in Ann Arbor around public power that will become a wildfire in the next year in Michigan. And watching other states as they take back their energy producers for public good and cheering them on. Yeah. The second question, and I'm sorry, you don't have a name tag. Lois. The second really great question Lois asked was about the workforce transition. And like all, big industry changes, there will be a transition, there will be bumpiness for some individuals, but there are also very intentional efforts to build a strong workforce. We're negotiating now with unions to really write laws so that we are creating quality, well-paid union jobs and protecting skilled workers and being able to negotiate to deliver these infrastructure investments to us. So I'm very excited about the opportunity for collaboration there, but it's been a long time coming. And the utility workers are still holdouts in this space, the actual utility workers, like your family member. So what we need is a whole economic transition for the utility companies and driving their incentives, transitioning them from energy producers to energy managers. And then we need an intentional workforce transition to allow that to happen. As some coal plants get shut down, workers will transition into potentially need to relocate to move to, certain plants that continue to generate fossil fuels, because we're not getting off the dope anytime soon. So those jobs will still be available, but they will be constricted and they may require relocation. The EV community, the EV conversation is very threatening to people as well, and to traditional workers. But looking at data from economists who spend, their entire career hours focused on these questions, it's my understanding that in the near decades, we will never move beyond a 50-50 balance between ICE vehicles, traditional internal combustion engines, and EVs. It will be a very long and slow transition that happens over years and over decades. And I think Michigan has become, by force, very adept and has wonderful social systems. This is one thing we do have, a strength we do have, is that we have great workforce development assets in our communities that help people with that transition. What we need to do now is to bump up unemployment benefits so that they can actually take care of a family in that transition. Make sure our unions are strong so that they have the resources to pour into education and skill set transitions, because our unions are also critical educators. I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about. There is a ton of, as much money as the state puts into workforce development, our union partners at the UAW and AFL-CIO and in the building trades match us dollar for dollar in training for quality workmanship, the kind of workmanship that we need on these, mid and large scale infrastructure projects. So the resources are there to help with that transition. We've done it for the auto industry, and we'll do it again for the energy industry. Rachel Hyde. I want to thank Rachel Hyde, who is a big contributor to making sure I make it to Lansing every 2 years. Thank you. Yeah, they're doing great, and I feel like you just sent me a softball. So that was when I was the executive director at WEMIAC for about a decade before serving. That was work that I made sure was happening in Grand Rapids Public Schools and then in the region schools. So a few assets. Grand Valley State University has a program called Groundswell, which teaches teachers to teach for the environment, for climate subjects. And then at WEMIAC, we created Teach for the Watershed, which is sort of a direct kid-to-kid program that over the course of 3 years provides teachers with the entirety of tools to manage that hands-on, place-based watershed education work in their own classrooms and schools. So every kid in Grand Rapids Public Schools and in several others like Godfrey Lee and others who have taken the model is getting watershed education in every grade between 4th grade and 10th grade every year. Yeah. Forest Hills has done some great work on this, you know, district by district. There are varying levels. You're also seeing a lot more nature-based education and outside classroom type of work happening and investments being made. So all these wonderful opportunities are emerging in that space. And environmental literacy is critical. If we don't understand how to protect the world, nobody's going to be successful in the future.
About 5 minutes.
Follow up on the education talk.
Yeah.
Having recently moved to the West Michigan area, we find here there's a much greater amount of parochial or Christian education
Yeah.
in parallel to the public education. Size-wise, in my estimation, seems almost 50-50. How much of this watershed education is making it to the parochial side compared to the public side?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. In terms of, so all of those resources are available to charter, public, and private schools, like at the teacher training level. And then we have some, in Ottawa County, there's the Outdoor Discovery Center, which is a great place-based learning nonprofit that's very well funded. They have their own school environments within the umbrella of their nonprofit, as well as, you know, hundreds of kids visiting their site every year. Here in Grand Rapids, Blandford Nature Center provides a similar role, and there's a Waggy-Wittenbach Center in Lowell. And all of those resources, it's my understanding, are used across a variety of education environments, including the homeschooling community, which is another pretty sizable population of students affiliated, you know, with Christian learning broadly, or faith-based learning. So yeah, no one's left behind, but you know, we haven't gone so far as a state, although there are bills present and submitted in the legislature right now. My seatmate Julie Rogers just submitted one to require climate education as part of the state curriculum standards, and I co-signed that bill. Great. One last question.
The federal government will be distributing money through IRA and things like that,
Yeah.
Which is very significant and administered through EAGLE. How much role does our legislature have over guiding their administration of that money?
Yeah, quite a bit. I've been pretty busy with it. We do, sorry. The question was how much influence does our state legislature have in distributing federal funds from the IRA and IJA funding pots that are part of this Biden bipartisan infrastructure package. Parts of it are very directly focused on key aspects of infrastructure, water infrastructure, roads, clean energy infrastructure, etc. The IRA tends to be a little more detailed. The IJA is slightly more fluid, and so we've been able to place some priority here in Michigan, in particular on water infrastructure funding, because that's sort of a missing piece for us. You may recall that we used to have the Clean Michigan Initiative, a bond that has expired and it needs to be renewed, and is absolutely necessary to continue a state investment that matches those federal funds and gets us to a healthier spot on water infrastructure than we are now. But yeah, the legislature does approve the budget, and one challenge has been that our environmental departments have been understaffed and underfunded for many decades. And so we were able to do 100 FTEs this session, and that's a pretty significant investment in a 450-person staff. So hopefully we'll be able to hire those into those seats. We have additional issues with state government not being able to deliver competitive wages with industry. So you start in state government as an environmental engineer at about $65,000 with a benefits package, but you can go into industry and start at $120,000. So we have very high turnover rates. Recent grads coming in, getting that state experience for 2 or 3 years, and then moving into other career paths in the environmental regulation industry with that knowledge of the state systems and making twice as much money. Yeah, so it's a challenge we're going to have to face in the coming budget cycles. Great. Well, I think our time is wrapped up. Thank you so much. Was there anyone who didn't get the outline of environmental bills who really wants one? Okay, thank you.
All right.
Feel free to reach out. You can find me pretty easily on the internet, State Representative Rachel Hood. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you again, Rachel, for stepping in last minute. I learned a lot. I hope other people did too. Just a reminder that Deb Rienstra is going to be leading Adult Faith Formation next week. She's the author of the book Refugia that many people in the congregation are leading. She'll also be here on Saturday to do a longer and more in-depth 2-hour talk. So if anyone's interested in that, it's from 9:30 to 11:30 to talk, but at 9 o'clock we'll be having some coffee and baked goods and fellowship time ahead of time for anyone who wants to come early and get a little breakfast. And we'd love you to register for that on our webpage so we know how many people are coming. So now we're going to end our time together by blowing out the Christ candle. As we do this, remembering that Christ, who was in one place and one time, is now in all places and all times. Amen.